My mom sold my car to pay for my brother's drug habit, saying he needs it more. I moved out and cut contact. That was 4 months ago. This morning she called me 15 times begging me to help her pay rent. Man, where do I even start with this mess? 4 months ago, I thought my biggest problem was deciding between community college or working full-time at Target. Turns out I was dead wrong about what rock bottom looked like. So here's the deal. I'm 19, been saving up since I was 16, working at various fast food joints and retail gigs. Finally scraped together enough cash to buy myself a 2018 Honda Civic. Nothing fancy, but it was mine, you know? I had the title, I made the payments, I even splurged on those fuzzy dice for the rearview mirror because why not live a little? My brother Jake is 23 and has been battling addiction for about 3 years. Now, started with prescription painkillers after a skateboarding accident, then moved on to harder stuff. Mom has been enabling him this whole time, thinking love and money could fix everything. Dad split when Jake first got arrested 2 years back, said he couldn't watch his family destroy itself anymore. I get it, addiction is a disease and all that, I really do. But there's a difference between supporting someone's recovery and just throwing money at their habit while they drain your bank account and steal your peace of mind. The morning everything went sideways started normal enough. I was getting ready for my shift at American Eagle when I noticed my car wasn't in the driveway. Figured maybe Mom borrowed it for groceries or something, even though she usually asks first. No big deal, right? Wrong. So very wrong. I texted her, asking where my car was, and she hit me back with this long paragraph about how Jake owed some scary people money and they were threatening him. Apparently, she'd sold my Civic to some guy on Facebook Marketplace for way less than it was worth just to get quick cash. The kicker? She'd forged my signature on the title transfer. When I called her, absolutely losing my mind, she just kept saying, he needs it more than you do. You're young, you can get another car. Jake might not survive if we don't help him. I'm standing there in my work uniform, keys to nowhere in my hand, just completely stunned. This woman really looked at her daughter who'd been busting her butt working 2 jobs and saving every penny, and decided her junkie son's poor life choices were more important than my actual legal property. The conversation got heated real quick. I told her she'd basically stolen my car, and she fired back with guilt trips about family loyalty and how I was being selfish during Jake's time of need. Time of need? Dude had been having a time of need for 3 years straight while I was working doubles at Taco Bell and babysitting neighbor kids to afford gas money. Update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the support so far. Some of you are asking if I called. The cops, I'm getting to that part. But first, I need to tell you about the conversation I had with Jake himself. What he said to me changed everything, and I'm still processing it. Should I have seen this coming? That afternoon, Jake stumbled home looking like he'd been awake for days. His eyes were all bloodshot, and he had that twitchy energy that meant he was either high or coming down from something. I confronted him about the car situation, expecting maybe some guilt or an apology. Instead, this dude looks me dead in the eye and goes, "Yeah, Mom told me she was gonna sell it. Thanks for taking one for the team, sis." Taking one for the team? I nearly threw my phone at his head. This wasn't some noble sacrifice for the greater good. This was straight-up theft to fund his next high. He didn't even pretend to feel bad about it. I asked him what he was going to do when the money ran out, because knowing Jake's track record, it wouldn't last long. He just shrugged and said Mom would figure something out. She always does. That's when it really hit me. I wasn't dealing with a family crisis. I was dealing with 2 people who saw me as their personal ATM and safety net. Jake had gotten comfortable, knowing Mom would always bail him out, and Mom had gotten comfortable using my stuff to do it. I spent that whole day calling around trying to figure out my legal options. Turns out, since we all lived at the same address and she had access to the title, proving theft would be complicated and expensive. The car was already sold and probably long gone. Even if I could prove my case, I'd be looking at months of legal battles I couldn't afford. But here's the thing that really got me. I realized this wasn't just about the car anymore. This was about respect, boundaries, and what kind of life I wanted to build for myself. Did I want to stick around and wait to see what else Mom would sacrifice on the altar of Jake's addiction? My college fund, my bedroom furniture, my sanity? That evening, I started looking at apartments on Craigslist. Nothing fancy, just a studio or 1 bedroom I could afford on my retail salary. It felt scary and exciting at the same time, like standing at the edge of a diving board. Mom caught me browsing rental listings and flipped out. Started crying about how I was abandoning the family during our darkest hour, how she needed me to help keep Jake on track, how we had to stick together. Classic manipulation playbook. Make the victim feel guilty for having boundaries. I told her I was done being the family's emergency fund and emotional support system. She'd made her choice when she sold my car without asking, and now I was making mine. The next few days were tense as heck. Mom kept trying to guilt me into staying, alternating between tears and anger. Jake mostly avoided me, probably because he knew he'd screwed up big time. I kept working my shifts, saving every penny I could for a security deposit and first month's rent. Finally found a small studio apartment about 20 minutes from my job. Nothing glamorous. Thin walls, outdated appliances, and a bathroom the size of a closet. But it was mine, and nobody could sell it out from under me to pay for their mistakes. The day I moved out was honestly one of the hardest days of my life. Mom stood in the doorway crying, begging me not to leave, promising things would be different. But I'd heard those promises before, every time Jake got arrested or overdosed or stole money from her purse. I hugged her goodbye and told her I loved her, but I couldn't keep enabling this cycle. If she wanted a relationship with me, she needed to stop choosing Jake's addiction over everything else, including her other kid. Update. Moving out was just the beginning. Living alone for the first time was scary but also amazing. I'm learning to cook, got a secondhand bike for transportation, and honestly started feeling like a real adult. But then something happened that made me question if I'd made the right choice. 3 weeks after I left, Jake ended up in the hospital. Was I wrong to leave my family during this crisis? Jake's hospitalization was a wake-up call, but not in the key way you might think. Mom called me sobbing, saying he'd overdosed and was in the ICU. My first instinct was to rush over there because despite everything, he's still my brother. When I got to the hospital, Jake was conscious, but looked terrible. Mom was holding his hand, telling him everything would be okay, that she'd take care of the medical bills somehow. Same old pattern: crisis, panic, promises, repeat. But while I was sitting in that sterile waiting room, something clicked for me. This wasn't the first overdose, and sadly, it probably wouldn't be the last. Every time something like this happened, Mom would drain her savings, max out credit cards, and create chaos for everyone else trying to save Jake. The doctor said he was stable, and Jake would be going to a court-ordered rehab program since this incident violated his probation. Good, I thought. Maybe forced treatment would work where voluntary programs hadn't. Mom, however, was already talking about refinancing the house to pay for private treatment, selling her jewelry, asking relatives for loans. The woman was planning to bankrupt herself again. And for what? Jake had been to rehab 4 times already. I realized that leaving home wasn't me abandoning my family. It was me refusing to go down with a sinking ship. Jake needed professional help, not more enabling. Mom needed to face the consequences of her choices instead of always having someone else clean up the mess. After Jake got transferred to the rehab facility, I had a heart-to-heart with Mom in the hospital parking lot. I told her I loved both of them, but I couldn't keep watching her destroy herself trying to fix someone who didn't want to be fixed. She needed to stop using me as her backup plan and start taking care of herself. She got angry, said I was being cold and selfish, that family is supposed to stick together no matter what. I reminded her that she'd literally stolen from me to enable Jake's addiction, so maybe she should rethink who was really being selfish here. We didn't speak for about 2 months after that. It was hard, not gonna lie. I missed talking to her, missed family dinners, missed having that connection, but I also felt lighter somehow, like I could finally breathe without waiting for the next crisis to hit. During those 2 months, I got promoted to assistant manager at American Eagle, started taking evening classes at the community college, and even went on a few dates with this guy from my biology class. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable and predictable in the best way. I also started going to Al-Anon meetings, which is like AA but for families of addicts. Hearing other people's stories made me realize how common this whole dynamic is. Addicts manipulating their families, families enabling destructive behavior, everyone thinking they're helping when they're actually making things worse. The meetings taught me about boundaries, codependency, and how to love someone without fixing them. Turns out you can care about someone deeply while still protecting yourself from their chaos. Revolutionary concept, right? Meanwhile, Mom's financial situation was getting worse. The hospital bills from Jake's overdose were piling up. She'd borrowed money against the house, and her credit cards were maxed out. She was working double shifts at the diner, but barely keeping her head above water. Jake got out of rehab after 90 days and seemed different at first. Called me to apologize, said he understood why I'd moved out, promised he was going to stay clean and make things right. Part of me wanted to believe him, but I'd heard similar speeches before. Sure enough, within 2 weeks of being home, he'd relapsed and stolen Mom's rent money to buy drugs. She called me crying, asking if I could help with just this 1 month's rent, promising she'd pay me back. I said no. Hardest no of my life, but I said it. Update. That was 4 months ago, and today Mom called me 15 times in a row. When I finally answered, she was crying and desperate, saying they're about to be evicted and asking if I could loan her money for rent. Jake is missing again, probably on a bender somewhere. I told her no, and she called me heartless. But here's what happened next that I never saw coming. After I hung up on Mom's 15th call, I sat in my tiny studio apartment feeling like absolute garbage. Part of me wondered if I was being too harsh, if maybe I should help just this once. But then I remembered something my Al-Anon sponsor told me. Every time you rescue someone from the consequences of their choices, you rob them of the chance to learn and grow. Mom and Jake had created this mess together through years of enabling and addiction. Me swooping in to save the day wouldn't fix anything. It would just reset the cycle so they could create an even bigger mess next time. But I'll be honest, hearing Mom that desperate broke my heart. Despite everything, she's still my mom, and the idea of her being homeless was scary. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I called her back and offered to pay for 1 month of rent, but only if she agreed to go to family counseling and Jake went back to rehab. Not some halfway house where he could walk away whenever he wanted. Real, long-term treatment. She immediately started crying with relief, saying yes to everything, promising they'd both get help. I told her I'd pay the rent directly to her landlord, not give her cash, and this was a one-time thing. If Jake relapsed again or she enabled him again, I was done for good. The next few weeks were intense. Mom started going to counseling and attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings for families. She was learning the same stuff I'd learned in Al-Anon about boundaries and enabling. It was hard for her to accept that her help had actually been making things worse. Jake fought the rehab idea at first, saying he could stay clean on his own, that he just needed another chance. But when Mom stood firm for once in her life and said it was treatment or homelessness, he finally agreed to check into a 6-month program. The facility was about 3 hours away, which was probably good. Distance meant he couldn't just walk out when things got tough, and it gave Mom space to work on herself without constantly worrying about his next crisis. I started having lunch with Mom once a week, slowly rebuilding our relationship. She was different, more aware of how her choices had affected everyone, less reactive to crisis situations. She'd gotten a second job and was working on paying down her debts instead of borrowing more money. One day she told me she was proud of me for setting boundaries, even though it had hurt at the time. She said watching me build an independent life had inspired her to do the same, instead of just surviving from one Jake crisis to the next. Jake completed the 6-month program, which honestly shocked everyone. He got connected with a sober living house and a job at a construction company that specifically hired people in recovery. He seemed genuinely different this time, more humble, more accountable for his actions. When he called to apologize for the car situation, I could tell he actually meant it. He'd been working with his counselor to make amends to people he'd hurt, and he understood why I'd had to distance myself. He even offered to help me save up for a new car, though I told him to focus on staying sober first. 8 months later, I'm happy to report that Jake is still clean and working steadily. Mom has paid off most of her debt and is back to her normal work schedule. She's even started dating someone, a nice guy from her church who knows about Jake's addiction and isn't scared off by our family's complicated history. As for me, I finished my first year of college with a 3.8 GPA, got promoted to store manager at American Eagle, and saved enough to buy a 2020 Honda Accord. Nothing fancy, but it's reliable, and more importantly, it's actually mine this time. I also met someone special in my psychology class, a guy who grew up with an alcoholic father and understands family dynamics like ours. We're taking things slow, but it's nice to be with someone who gets why boundaries matter. The biggest change is in how we communicate as a family. We talk about problems instead of pretending they don't exist. Mom asks for advice instead of just expecting me to fix things. Jake takes responsibility for his choices instead of blaming everyone else. It's not perfect. Recovery is a daily process, and there are still moments when I worry about Jake relapsing or Mom falling back into old patterns. But for the first time in years, we're all focused on our own lives instead of just surviving Jake's addiction. Sometimes people ask if I regret moving out or if I think I was too harsh by refusing to help with rent that day. Honestly, no regrets at all. Setting those boundaries forced everyone in my family to grow up and take responsibility. If I'd kept enabling the chaos, we'd probably still be stuck in the same destructive cycle. The hardest lesson I learned was that loving someone doesn't mean rescuing them from every consequence. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and let people face the reality of their choices. It's scary and it hurts, but it's the only way real change can happen. Now when I drive my Honda Accord to work or school, I remember why I fought so hard to become independent. Not because I don't love my family, but because I learned to love myself enough to demand better. And ultimately, that choice helped all of us build healthier, more honest relationships. Jake texted me last week saying he's been clean for 10 months and wanted to take me and Mom out for dinner to celebrate. We went to Olive Garden. Nothing fancy, but it felt like a real family dinner for the first time in years. No crisis to manage, no money problems to solve, just 3 people who'd been through hell and made it out stronger. As I write this, I'm sitting in my own apartment, which I've decorated with plants and thrift store furniture that actually matches. My car is parked safely in my assigned spot downstairs. My grades are good, my job is going well, and I'm building a life I'm proud of. The best part? When my phone rings now, I don't automatically assume it's an emergency. Sometimes it's just Mom calling to chat about her day or Jake sending funny memes from work. We talk like normal people instead of crisis managers. Setting boundaries saved my family, but more importantly, it saved me from losing myself in someone else's chaos. And that's a lesson worth way more than any car could ever be.